Welcome back here, Coastal Daybreak here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And our next guest has one of the most unusual books I think that we've run across in all the books that we've interviewed over the last 19 years here on Coastal Daybreak. So I was really looking forward to it. It's called The Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, and Style. Veronica Hinke joins us this morning. Hi, Veronica. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Looking forward to talking with you.
And did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you sure did.
Oh, thank you. And where are you today, by the way?
I'm near Chicago.
Okay. This today happens to be the anniversary of when the Titanic set sail for its sea trials. So it's appropriate that we're talking today. And this is a most unusual book. Why did you write about the drinking, the dining, and the style of the Titanic? What led you to this?
Well, one example you just brought up, and thank you for mentioning that today is the 107th anniversary of the first sea trials of the Titanic, or at least one of the first that we know of, on April 2nd. And one of the things that I found in my research was a menu of what the crew ate that day. And the reason I wanted to keep going with this project is because I learned so many amazing things about the foods of the era and the foods that were tied to the Titanic in so many ways, including crew menus and even steerage and second class we look at. We sort of go beyond that first class dinner that so many people have replicated throughout the years. And one of the items that was on the menu today, 107 years ago, was plover, which is a seabird, of course, and we can only assume that the people that planned that menu did that on purpose in honor of these crew members who had dedicated their lives to working on the sea.
Well, I'm looking at the crew menu that's in here, and it says during the sea trials, it says, let's see, roast duckling, also a saddle of mutton. We rarely refer to the saddle any longer anymore. Saddle of mutton, artichokes on here, French beans. It sounds wonderful for the crew.
Right. They had a really nice meal, and the menu you're looking at right now is from the following day, April 3rd, which is another great example of what did they eat on the Titanic. Aside from that first-class dinner that we know so much about, that menu is included in the book thanks to the Stanley and Laurel Lair collection.
Well, okay, no, I had to do this since we have to. Does any of the menus include iceberg lettuce?
No, there is not any iceberg lettuce.
All right. Just had to ask.
Not in the menus that I was able to find. We do see many really beautiful nods to the time of year. We see asparagus. There's lots of English spring peas and rhubarb and things that really shout out spring, which is, of course, the time when the Titanic sailed.
This is a wonderful book that combines both the history but also the elegance and the style. So on that last night, or the last even, since they set sail, since it hadn't been at sail that long, what was the life like for the different classes on board?
Well, they were very different. A few years after the Titanic is when we experienced World War I, which changed the class divides drastically, and we have not seen anything like that since. And when the Titanic sailed, one of the reasons I think people like to study the Titanic and learn about it is because the classes were so distinct, unlike what we see today. One of the most distinct examples I can think of is that in third class, the midday meal was the heavy meal of the day with menu items like beef and brown gravy. That's what they were eating on the 14th, the day that the iceberg was in their midst, and they didn't realize it, and they struck it at 11:40 that night. And we see that in, all classes on the Titanic. The food and accommodations were much better than on any other ship at the time. In first class, all of the meals were lavish, and even in second class, they were pretty substantial. But we do see that huge difference. Another thing that I learned about regarding the difference in the classes is that we hear about these hooks that were hanging on the wall in the third class dining area. which indicates to us that these people had to bring their coats and belongings with them to their meals because they had shared accommodations. So they would have had their coats with them at dinner, and it would have been a much more, or they might have, I'm thinking they probably would have been a much more a much different feel to the opulence and splendor that we would have seen in first class.
Yeah. And where did most of the crew come from?
Most of the crew came from, for a couple of, geographically, many of them came from Southampton, England. In fact, when the Titanic sunk, it was like losing a whole town because Southampton was a seaport where people would go just to find work aboard the ships. Many of them, aside from geographically, the other real key component with where they were from, many of them had transferred over from the Olympic, which was Titanic's sister ship.
Now, again, fascinating work. The book is called The Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, and Style. Tell us a little bit about the drinking part of that. What were the beverages of choice?
Well, this was at the cusp of Prohibition, and no one knew that was coming. So it's really a time capsule looking at this example of opulence and splendor at a time right before many of the pre-Prohibition cocktails that we're sort of resurrecting today. They sort of fell through the cracks for many years. One of them is the Bronx cocktail. It's made with gin, a little bit of orange. You can either use orange peel or zest, or you can use a little bit of orange juice. I like it like that. The Bronx is certainly one of the more popular drinks at Clover Club. There were a lot of milk punches, things that we just don't see as much today.
You tell a lot of stories in this book. I mean, a lot of different personal stories, and many of us who've seen the movie Titanic, or maybe we've watched some of the documentaries, and that's most of what we know. But you've done a lot of great homework and a lot of research on this subject. So just in flipping through the book, I was attracted to the story about Kate Buss, and especially as I mentioned that she was going to be going out to the West Coast after the boarding and after docking in New York City to the Wild West. And tell me about her. What was that story about?
Well, Kate Buss's story is really interesting because for me it was interesting. I really loved reading about her situation where she was traveling alone, parent, because I did a lot of traveling as a single person, and she buddied up with another single woman and a couple of single friends. And I really enjoyed, reading about how they had a hymn service that last Sunday night. And a lot of the songs that they sang that night had a lot of sort of, foreboding messages. No one would have known what was going to come next, but they were songs that were, tied to survivalist and, thinking about your maker, things like that were, tied to those Christian beliefs that they adhered to so strongly, that group. And they had an impromptu hymn service. It wasn't scheduled, and they wanted to do something really special that night, which is a coincidence in itself. So the journalist Lawrence Beasley organized this hymn service, and the songs that happened to be sang that night just are it's pretty amazing to think that the way the songs were tied to what would come to pass in just a few hours.
Well, it's an amazing book, and I hope that people will pick it up. It's called The Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, and Style, and Veronica Hinke is the author. And Veronica, thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
This is Coastal Daybreak here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and we'll have more to come in just a moment.